Welcome back, everybody. This week we are getting our very first X-Men animated cartoon that has been put out in the last 15 years. There has not been an X-Men animated show since 2009 with Wolverine and the X-Men, and now we have X-Men 97 coming out on Wednesday, which is a revival of the very famous 90s X-Men the animated series cartoon, and I am both I'm kind of apprehensive, honestly, because we haven't gotten an X-Men cartoon in so long, so I want it to be good, but I don't know. I don't know how it's going to turn out. But I thought that this would be a great time to go over some of the animated series of X-Men in the past and talk about how good they were. I'm going to mainly be talking about X-Men, the animated series in the 90s, obviously, which I think are the best animated adaptations of the X-Men ever. And I want to talk about what they got right and some of the criticisms levied against them and if those hold any water, so that we can know what we're going to be talking about going into X-Men 97. X-Men the Animated Series and Evolution are some of my favorite cartoon series of all time, so without further delay, X-Men the Animated Series, released in 1992, was an animated show released at a time where animation was going through a great change. Animation in the 60s and 70s and 80s was made in a way where the animation was incredibly cheap and where the storylines could not handle anything challenging. They couldn't have any depth whatsoever. They had to be made in the sense that a 2-year-old could watch this. And so in the 90s, different shows were coming out, probably the most influential, Batman the Animated Series, that were starting to get darker and more challenging and a bit more complicated in their writing. And X-Men the Animated Series was one of those shows. X-Men the Animated Series had everything going against it. The network had absolutely no faith in it whatsoever. And in fact, the only reason why the series got greenlit is because the network took it as a part of a deal that they would get to air Power Rangers if they greenlit the X-Men. So the only reason why this series even exists is actually just because the network wanted to air Power Rangers, which they saw as the actual popular property. But X-Men the Animated Series, because of that, was given like a shoestring budget. But because of that shoestring budget, a lot of the famous elements about it came to life. For example, the very famous theme song was just made on an old MIDI recording system, which is why it has that specific sound that we recognize to this day, and in my opinion, very hard to replicate. But what X-Men the Animated Series is a great example of with that understanding is when you have people come together who don't have a lot of money, but they really have the skill, you can make something amazing. You don't have to have a lot of money to make something good. And what they really excelled at here was the writing of the show. What really stands out to me when I rewatch the animated series, and it wasn't even in my time. I wasn't born when this came out, but I've gone back and I've watched like all the Marvel cartoons ever. But what really stands out to me when I start this series is the atmosphere that it established. It very quickly establishes, okay, there's this race called mutants, and they have people prejudiced against them, they have people afraid of them, and to be a mutant is kind of a scary thing. And we really established that in the beginning with Jubilee, who is a teen girl, and she hears her foster parents are talking about getting rid of her, and she feels like she's a freak, that she doesn't belong.
Why is this happening to me? I used to be a normal kid. It's not my fault.
So this gives a very dark and exciting atmosphere, but it's one that instantly relates it to kids, because one of the ways, and what X-Men the Animated Series producers really highlighted, is the use of X-Men as a metaphor for adolescence, that when you hit being a teen, you all of a sudden feel like you don't belong, there's things happening to you that you can't explain, and so it really hits home those fears, where Jubilee, being a teenager, doesn't feeling like she belongs, is concerned about what her foster parents think of her, and being thrust into this world where it feels like everything is against her. And that is, once again, what instantly relates it to kids and is instantly making a connection with them. But then they get thrust into this dark atmosphere, whereas Jubilee finds out that she's not really a freak, that her powers are a gift, that she is special. Also, once again, very excited for adolescent kids who feel like they don't belong, being immersed in this world where they see someone who finds belonging, and then they can feel a sense of belonging to this world as well. Now, X-Men the Animated Series has had a lot of criticisms levied against it in retrospective, and I want to address those. The first criticism is that the animation isn't very good, and that is agreeable, that they just didn't have a big budget for the animation. There's a lot of inconsistencies. The models weren't consistent at all. But once again, if you have good writing, then that means that you can stand to have some animation that isn't perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just has to have something in there that makes somebody connect with it. Another criticism I've heard levied against this show is that it doesn't have character development, and that's actually not true. Different shows shows go through different types of character development. X-Men Evolution has a different type of character development. Sometimes characters develop in the sense that as you watch the show, they progress. They're at a different point and at a different characterization than they were before. But character development, I think, is ultimately about informing the audience through who a character is. If a character doesn't have any development, probably means that they just stayed one-dimensional and there's nothing that you can draw from to get to know them in any way. X-Men the Animated Series sort of hits the ground running, sort of giving you the very basic surface level understanding of who these characters are with very, very distinct personalities. But then as we go on, it gradually fleshes out who they are, what their weaknesses are, where they come from, and you get character development in that way. One of the best characters in the series and one of the fan favorites is Rogue, who's always been my favorite, and you see her go through a lot of episodes in this series that really flesh out who she is. There is the Muir Island saga where she wants to get rid of her powers because she can't stand not being able to touch another human being, and it's actually really heartbreaking but really strong to see her at the end realize that even though it is really hard to live with these powers and it's really hard for her to handle, that she should not change who she is and that it's more important to have these powers to help other people. And she also gets one of my favorite episodes in the series, A Rogue's Tale, that goes to her backstory and how she was raised by Mystique, how she's never really had a home, how she incapacitated Carol Danvers, which is a big tragic happening in her past and something she feels very guilty for, which is how she has her powers of flight and strength in the first place, which once again goes through the baggage of the character, that even the biggest powers she has aren't really her own, but also shows that the empathy that has grown in her and who she is at heart. Speaking of writing and dialogue, this series has been accused of having a lot of cheesy dialogue and one-liners, and it absolutely does, but I want to defend it for a minute and say that's part of the charm of the show. I heard someone once describe X-Men the Animated Series as ironically hilarious, and that fits for me because there's a lot of moments where the line delivery or the dialogue is just really funny.
Leave me alone!
You have no right to... These give me plenty of rights.
But it gives the show a certain charm to it. There's actually, as the writers are working with the extreme personalities of these characters, they actually come up with a lot of witty dialogue that's really fun and informs who they are.
Been a long shift?
It was, till you showed up.
Ooh, it's a tad chilly in here, don't you think?
Like they say, cold hands?
Out cold.
And other times it's just so over the top. Once again, it's just fun. The voice acting has been accused of being very over the top in the show, and once again, it is. But that grew on me a lot as I watched the show. First of all, it's a callback to what the comics were, where the Chris Claremont comics that this is very much based off of, he was very, very much exaggerating the characters' accents and personalities, and that carries over to this show, and I actually like it because it just makes the characters' personalities so strong and so blatant, it just makes it all the more fun. But I think that people might look at the cheesiness of this show and not look at the actual smart writing that it has. It has a lot of allegory in it, like the legacy virus panic was supposed to be a representative of the AIDS panic. The Friends of Humanity, I think it's pretty obvious they are the Ku Klux Klan. But through that, you get to see the bigotry that these characters have to face and how that can be a metaphor for civil rights. What I really like about the X-Men is they can be a metaphor for so many things. They're a metaphor for civil rights. They're a metaphor for adolescence. I even think that in some cases, I think the Morlocks can be a representative of disabled people. There's just a lot to get into. This show not only layers in political issues, but religion as well. And it is very, very rare for a show to layer in religion like this. And it comes with another one of the best episodes, which is Nightcrawler, in which you get to, this is some of the smartest exploration of religion I've seen in a mainstream property. You have Nightcrawler, this character who was born looking like a demon and has a very sad life because of that, but he found solace through his Christianity. And what's really smart about the episodes is it explores religion based on how different characters react to it. You have Nightcrawler, who's the devout Christian. You have Gambit, who's just having none of that. You have Rogue, who's very curious about that, but hasn't necessarily converted or anything. And then you have Wolverine, who sort of had lost his faith over the years. And it's just very smart and how it delivers this, because it does so in a way that is not beating people over the head over anything, not making them feel forced or preached at or anything, because when you do that, you turn people off. No, this does it in a way where you're just showing different perspectives. And as one of the quotes from the show is, look at things through different eyes. That's all it's asking you to do. And that's why the way that it communicates its message is so effective.
Would it hurt so much to see the world through different eyes?
While Nightcrawler is one of the best episodes, the second episode that Nightcrawler appears in, I also consider one of the best episodes, Bloodlines, where Nightcrawler discovers that his mother was Mystique and how she abandoned him and kind of talks to him as if she saw him as nothing, which once again has one of the most powerful moments in the entire show about how Nightcrawler is able to forgive this woman who's caused him so much pain and still respect her as his mother.
You want to talk about sad? I am a shapeshifter, an outcast, even among mutants trusted by no one. I don't have a life of my own. I just steal little bits from other people's lives. But that's how I survive. So there's your truth, son. I didn't want you. Still sad for me.
I will beg God to bestow His grace on me, so that I may learn to forgive you. Then I will ask Him to bestow His grace on you, so that you might forgive yourself.
And those are just great examples of how mature this show actually is underneath all the animation, underneath all the cheesy dialogue, and why this show connected with so many people. But not all the episodes of X-Men are that heavy. There's Sanctuary, which is a couple of episodes that I really personally like. It kind of gives me a Star Wars feel. It's when Magneto tries to create his asteroid M and bring the mutants on there, and then there's an attempt on his life, and the X-Men are blamed, and Gambit gets captured, and it's just a really exciting pair of episodes. But I think that the best episodes in the entire series are the Dark Phoenix saga. And unlike other episodes in the series, this one does not have any sort of political theme or anything, because the X-Men is a variety. They are space adventures. They are everything in between. And Dark Phoenix saga is so well done because it's basically 4 to 5 episodes of just this thing that cannot be defeated. It is just impossible to be defeated. And there is a scariness to it, but there's a lot of complexity as well, because you've got Jean Grey, who is sort of the heart of the team this entire time, who is trapped by this entity, and they need to get her away from there. And there's where the stakes are really set, especially between the relationship of Scott and Jean, and trying to get their friend back, but seeing how far away she is taken by this creature. And there is a real intensity to these episodes that like, Dark Phoenix has been done twice badly by the movies now. You need to watch the animated version of this storyline and understand why it's so good. I think that the animated version of this story is even better than the comic book version. But yes, those are most definitely the best episodes in the entire series. And if you want to follow some of those episodes, I think that they would give you a well-rounded view about why this series was so exciting to people and why it probably is the biggest thing that X-Men has ever been in. And it's all about the characters and the character work and how the audience was able to connect to these very interesting characters and their dynamics with each other, because there's just a lot of chemistry there. There's the love triangle, or in this case, unrequited triangle between Wolverine, Jean, and Scott. There's this sort of father-daughter relationship that gets hinted at with Wolverine and Jubilee. There's the friends to rivals relationship between Professor Xavier and Magneto. There's the flirtatious romantic relationship between Gambit and Rogue. And then there's the rivalries between all of the characters as they argue with each other and have to figure out a way to work together and live together, and how they come together kind of as a family. And it's, once again, one of my favorite animated cartoons of all time. And once again, there's a lot of funny stuff in it, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I've just always found Professor Xavier's chair in this show to be hilarious, how enormous it is, how it's always sailing everywhere. And yes, there were flaws in the show. Some of the dialogue that was cheesy was just cheesy. The animation wasn't great. Sometimes the episodes would go along at a pace that didn't make a whole lot of sense. For example, in Sanctuary, when the X-Men are accused of being assassins, it all happens so fast. They just run up and then the guy accuses them and then everyone believes them. So there are some issues with writing and pacing issues from that sense. But once again, you don't need to have a show be perfect. You can have a show have a lot of flaws, and sometimes those flaws will give a show even more charm. But yeah, I overall do not agree with the people that said that X-Men the Animated Series is just too dated. Elements of it definitely are dated, but overall it's a great show that I can see why it's the building block of the X-Men and why in a lot of cases I'd say it's considered definitive X-Men. Which is why going forward into this new series is why it has a very much a lot to live up to, and why that it's kind of coming off of one of the greatest superhero cartoons of all time. I think Batman the Animated Series honestly holds up the best in terms of its timeless feel, its quality of writing and animation, but X-Men the Animated Series I think is the second best superhero animated show of all time. And it's why I really hope that going forward we can start getting better adaptations of the X-Men like this, because like the Fox movies of the X-Men have nothing on the animated show. And even if X-Men 97 doesn't turn out, I'm always going to enjoy going back and enjoying the 5 seasons of X-Men the Animated Series over and over again. And I would definitely recommend everyone check it out. It is available to watch right now, all 5 seasons on Disney+. The episodes are all in order. Or are you already a fan of X-Men the Animated Series, and what are some of your favorite episodes? Let me know in the comments below. I will also want to do a review of X-Men Evolution, which in my opinion is also one of the greatest animated shows ever made. Let me know in the comments below if you're interested in seeing that, and I will see you guys next time.